So like James said, I work for a team called Amber, and Amber is a service-based team. Before I was at Amber, I worked for a couple of big companies. So Amber is actually one of the smaller companies I've worked for. I started Jamdat, which got purchased by EA, and then I spent 4 years at Disney running their external development. So some of the more notable titles I've shipped as a product owner. And then on the Amber side, we have been around since 2013, and like James said, we are a service-based org. We are a game development and studio services agency, so people will hire us to take on development for them. And traditionally, this development had been your standard development of an app or a game. Sometimes we would come in and do some custom engineering if a team was having issues and needed us to come in and firefight into their code. And then about a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, we started talking to teams about another type of service, and that's LiveOps takeover, because we started seeing in the marketplace, and this was definitely a problem when I was at Disney as well, that sometimes the team that's working on the core product, if the product becomes successful, you want to take that team and move them onto a new product so they can sort of create success again. And we started seeing that there was a need in the marketplace for teams to come in and be able to step in as that second team to be running with live operations while that other team moves on to something else. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, these are some of the partners that we've worked with. What I'm going to talk to you about today are 2 projects that we've worked on in LiveOps, and I could talk for a long, long time about all the things we've done in these games, but I decided to focus on kind of one main area for each product that you would hopefully be able to take away some value from. The first one is going to be Inside Out Thought Bubbles, which was a game that we worked on for Disney. We took that over in August of 2016. And the other game I'm going to talk about is a game called Gods of Rome. And Gods of Rome was a game that we took over from Gameloft in June of last year. Specifically in regards to Inside Out Thought Bubbles, I'm going to talk about our approach to level design and how we look at puzzle games to balance them appropriately so you can have maximum user engagement and limit churn. And then on Gods of Rome, I'm going to talk a little bit about merchandising and some sales and events things that we have done to drive value in conversion and spending in the game. So Inside Out Thought Bubbles, if you guys are not familiar with the product, it's a bubble shooter. It's a puzzle game, saga-based bubble shooter with the characters from Pixar's Inside Out. And we took the game over after the team had shipped probably about 600 levels, and we ended up adding about, just south of another 600 levels. So for the better part of a year and a half, we were adding levels, features, doing seasonal events, having Christmas content around the holidays. Obviously, lots of bug fixes that we were fixing, and then we would try to do client updates every couple weeks. So we would make sure that, when you're running a service, you want to bring people back, and in order to do that, having new stuff for them to do every few weeks is optimal. So when we're talking about level design in Inside Out Thought Bubbles, and really this applies to any puzzle game that's sort of progression-based, and progression-based meaning level-based, something like Tsum Tsum or Emoji Blitz, this isn't really going to apply to because those are more arena-based puzzle games, but this would work for your typical saga puzzle game. So basically what we do when we design the levels of a puzzle game, since it's a linear progression, we want to make sure that there's some variability in the levels overall. And that comes from a couple of different areas I'm going to talk about. The first one is difficulty. So we measure difficulty in average attempts to complete a level, win a level. So if it takes, on average, our users one play to win a level, it's a very easy level. If it takes our users, on average, 20 plays, that's a very hard level, right? Because sometimes it can be more and sometimes it can be less, but the average is 20. So you have to sort of balance the levels with a smattering and ramping of easy to hard, and then not too many hard in a row because you want the user to sort of relax after a hard level and kind of feel like they've accomplished something by going back to an easy one. So we try to create this roller coaster sort of design in the difficulty. And then the second thing we do is variety. So our designers and product managers are big fans of a design theory called rational design. And you can look it up on the internet, and there's some excellent articles on Gama Sutra. But what that philosophy for design is basically finding a metric-based approach to design. There's still creativity involved, but with a metric-based approach, you're able to add maximum variability in the content because you can play around the spreadsheet. So what we do is we create a spreadsheet, and we have the designers and the product managers go in and create what they think is going to be the best balancing for a puzzle game with the different mechanics that you can have in different levels. And the good thing about mechanics is that when you create a mechanic in a puzzle game, it becomes an emergent tool to create more levels. And you'll see this done in match threes a lot, where they'll introduce you to a new mechanic like frozen tiles that you need to break in order to get to the gems. And then they'll add those frozen tiles with like another mechanic to be able to extend the value. So with rational design, you're able to have all these mechanics and then start playing around with mixing and matching to find the optimal solution in variability of design. And then what we do is we ship the game and we ship the levels, and then we look at them. And from a KPI standpoint, we are measuring attempts, we are measuring the churn rate, we are measuring average revenue per user per level. Because ideally what you want to do when you have a puzzle game is you sort of want to have that perfect balance of challenge and payment, where you want people to engage in purchasing your power-ups and purchasing more energy. And in order to do that, you need to find the sweet spot with conversion and ARPU on a per level basis. So after we sort of get the levels back, we look at them, we sort of flag ones that we think we have to address. Specifically in the example behind me, we're going to reference levels 1074, 1083, and 1091 from Inside Out Thought Bubbles. Once we look at those, we make an assessment based on what we're seeing. So level 1074, we look at the churn rate, which is a pretty high churn rate. You don't want 1% of your user base churning out of a level. That's a lot. So we know that that's a problem. And the reason that that's a problem is probably because we had a target difficulty of 6, but the actual difficulty is 14. So our guys need to go in and make some mechanic changes to make the level easier. Example 2, we look at that and we see that while the game was supposed to be a hard level at 20 average wins, or 20 average moves to win, you actually see that the actual difficulty was 10. So we needed a hard level, but our guys didn't make as hard of a level, and what that's contributing to is your churn versus ARPU being way too high. So basically, we need to increase the level of difficulty on that level. And then the final one, we made a bet, and this happens all the time, where you make a bet, and the level, average attempts for the level come out higher or lower, but it's okay. And you don't see any sort of churn, or you don't see any sort of low ARPU. So in that situation, after our PMs go through and look at the level and look at the ARPU and the churn, they realize it's fine. It's okay to keep the level the way it is. So that's a really quick overview of how you can manage a linear-based puzzle game. But any linear-based free-to-play game can use those similar design thoughts and rational design in order to create a good difficulty balancing and design variability. One thing I will say is that for us, in our experience, users really want new mechanics. So one of the best things you can do when you're releasing new content, and you don't have to do this for every single level you release, but every content should introduce some new mechanic that the user can learn and play around with, and then further creates more emergent gameplay opportunities for you in your puzzle game. The other one is success churn is an important thing to look at. Success churn basically means you have players that are playing a level, completing it, and leaving your game. And usually the reason that happens is because a level is too easy or a level's not fun. So if you see success churn, that's a harder problem to fix, but it can be fixed usually by tweaking the mechanic and making it more fun. of an experience for users. Third, you want the users to be sort of in that sweet spot when they finish a level. You want them to always think like they were super close to winning or they were just barely won. Anybody that loses badly or wins by too much of a margin, they're going to lose the engagement in the product. So there's sort of a sweet spot of over 85% that you want to have that success ratio be in. And then every game is different. So you may have one roller coaster sort of level design that you think is going to work because you worked on another match 3, and what you find out is the audience is different. Maybe the skill sets are different for the brand. Inside Out maybe has a younger audience, right, than some other match 3 games. So you maybe have to make the levels a little bit easier than you would if you were working on like a King style puzzle game. So it's important that there's no sort of silver bullet. It's important that you look at the game you're making, look at the audience, and try to really cater that flow to the type of game that you're making. All right, so let's talk about a midcore title now, Gods of Rome. So Gods of Rome, we took over this tile from Gameloft in June of 2017. Since we took this game over, we've added new heroes, store optimizations, new missions, we increased level caps. So we've just been adding a ton of content and feature revisions into this product. We've been able to drive some real value in the KPIs, which I'll share with you. But first, I'm going to focus on some of the things that we added to the product that weren't in there before that helped drive higher monetization. So one of the first things that we looked at was just sort of how they were merchandising in this game. And you've probably seen this before when you've looked at some optimized stores or unoptimized UI in a free-to-play game. But it's very important that when you're trying to sell the user something, that you explain to them what it is and what they're getting in return. If the user can't sort of make that assessment from the price point and the value of what you're giving them and just looking at your merchandising, there's a problem there. So we noticed that right away with the Gameloft title. We made sure to add a lot of clarity in the items themselves so people knew what they were getting. The other thing that we did, and that I think everybody should be looking at is rewarded video. The game didn't have any advertising in it, and rewarded video I think is a great way to make ancillary revenue. On this title, I think we drove another like 2 cents of ARPDAU just with ads. And rewarded video is a user experience that is user initiated. So as opposed to traditional interstitials and full screen ads, rewarded video actually creates more engagement from your user base because they're able to make the choice that they want currency and watch a video ad to do that. So I would recommend looking at your free-to-play games to always think about rewarded video as an option. Promotions and events was key. So we noticed that Gameloft was seeing the majority of their revenue spikes when they ran events. We didn't think they were running enough events though. So when we took over the product, we immediately started trying to figure out a plan to be able to have more events for people to come back to. And again, very similar to sort of the levels you deliver in a puzzle game every couple of weeks, having events for users in a mid-core game or even a casual game is one of the highest drivers of retention and one of the highest drivers of engagement. So we knew we really wanted to figure out a way to bring the events into more of the product. And one thing that we saw that Gameloft was doing was they were basically running an event every weekend and they were seeing a spike, as you do, because all your users are coming back for that event. And when they're coming back for that event, they're engaging in it and they're usually spending to try to beat the event. But one thing that we tried, which was actually sort of a bet by our team, was, well, let's try to do midweek events too and see what happens. And we weren't sure what was going to happen. We weren't sure if we're going to cannibalize some of our weekend sales or if we were going to see just people get tired of so many events. And it actually turned out really good. We added midweek events and we saw the spike. Not as high of a spike as we would see on the weekends, just because I think there's less availability for people to play their games on the weekdays. But we did see a spike, and it did not interrupt the weekend spike. So we actually ended up driving monthly conversion and monthly revenue higher by just adding events during the week. And then the other thing I think that was a big learning experience for us, and I love the team for experimenting, is trying to find what type of content our audience cares about. And just like when you're looking at your audience for a puzzle game and understanding who cares about Inside Out and bubble shooters, you need to look at your game, look at your audience, and try to make some bets on what they want. And with this game, when we took it over, we noticed that it was very popular in parts of Asia, specifically China. And given the game is called Gods of Rome, we started playing around with the conceit a bit to see how loose we could take it. So we decided to add a god from Chinese mythology to the game. And that character alone drove a significant amount of revenue for us, 20% compared to the other heroes in the game. And actually converted over 51% of the people that spent on her had never spent anything in our game before. So not only did we drive revenue, we created a whole bunch of first-time payers. And one thing that you should always know about first-time payers is if you get someone to pay in your game, they are way more likely to stick around in your game, and they're way more likely to spend again. So it was actually a really good experiment by our team to look at our audience, realize that we had a dedicated fan base in China, and put a Chinese character in a game called Gods of Rome. There are some other things I'm just going to go over quickly. Engagement stuff we've added. Daily activities are key for driving engagement and retention. Every game should have them. You need to give people a reason to come back daily. And having loot boxes or even just sort of scaling rewards that you can have for coming back day over day is a fantastic technique that anybody could do. For us, we made a bunch of UI changes to the game. They were showing the heroes in the hero menu, but they weren't showing all the heroes you could get. And they were also not showing you the heroes that were coming down the road. So in order to sort of drive engagement and collection of the heroes in our game, we made sure to present all the heroes to the users so they could see them all, they could understand what their skills were, and then you could also see the ones that were coming down the road. And then we have experimented with a double XP event, which is if you play PvP while this event is going, you basically get a buff to your XP earning, and we've found some fantastic engagement with that. When people feel like they're getting something special and you can come in during a certain time and get something special, they're definitely more likely to engage with your product. So all these changes drove about a 10% increase in average playtime per session, which we have a few sessions that people are playing a day, so that's a pretty significant amount of time that people are in our product now because of these engagement changes. So if you look at the KPIs that we're able to drive since August of last year, you can see some real value there, and we've been able to drive some great numbers in conversion and engagement, and we're overall very happy, and the relationship that we have with Gameloft is awesome, and it's working out really well. So for us, in closing, it's a really great opportunity to be able to work with teams like Disney and Gameloft to be able to take on their products. And it's also good for the partners because we're giving the partners some freedom to move their teams around and do some other stuff. So I think for us, having found this niche of doing LiveOps as a service has been pretty cool, and we're really enjoying it. So with that, we'll take some questions.
So yeah, on the puzzle games, those are all design games. Do you do anything with like procedural generation for any of the levels?
Yeah. So if you take the basic format of rational design, you can easily create a machine learning sort of construct that takes that spreadsheet and will use some AI to randomize the level components. We do have a tool set like that we use for our puzzle games. The next extension of that is something we're looking at we have an R&D group, an internal R&D group we call it Amber Labs, and they're sort of looking at future tech that we can use to make our live service offering more attractive to partners. And one of the things that we are looking at is a machine learning tool set for just creating the level design. So we could, you don't have to have a manual designer creating levels for every month. You could have conceivably 300 levels a month because you got a computer doing it, and you have a human that would eventually need to go through and make sure everything looked cool, but it helps you scale a lot faster.
On the puzzle side of things, like inside Thought Bubble, in general, because you mentioned that you guys actually talked about how they actually measure like player skills in the games, right? So I'm just wondering, like, how do you guys actually do it, and what metrics and KPI that you actually use to measure like player skills for how they actually play the levels in general?
I'm sorry, I'm not getting the exact question you're asking about. What are you referencing?
There's a slide that you actually talked about, number 4, the important things about like successful puzzle games actually measuring player skills. So I'm just wondering, how do you actually
Are you saying player skills? I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well. It's like an echo.
Yeah, player skills.
Player skills, okay.
Yes, and I'm wondering, how do you do that, and what KPI you actually use to actually measure that?
Yeah, so we look at, that is average attempts, right? So if you're looking at your puzzle game and you want to know how skilled your player is, you look at the average attempts that they're taking to win a game. And that's something that we just refer to as difficulty. So if you know you're creating easy levels and you're still having problem with high difficulty, then your audience is probably not as skilled as they would be in another type of game. So whenever we're adjusting to player skills, we're doing it by looking at the difficulty readout of the progression.
Yes, earlier you touched on success churn. I was wondering if you have an example from your own development background of encountering success churn and how you overcame it.
How many, I'm sorry, how much, what's the exact data point you were looking for the success churn?
Just an example of if you've encountered it in your own development history, and what steps you took to overcome it. Yeah,
so it happens all the time. And it's mostly, like I said, because the game, for some reason, the game's not resonating with the audience. And in puzzle games, the majority of the time that happens, it is usually because the puzzle level is not fun, or the mechanic is not fun, or users are getting through it too easily. So one thing that we looked at, so there was another game we worked on called Disney Dream Treats. We took that over for Disney as well. And when we were working on Disney Dream Treats, it was sort of a Magic Kingdom themed progression. So you sort of went around to different parks and played with the Disney characters. We saw that because we thought that we'd have to make the game easier because it was sort of Disney themed and it had Mickey Mouse in there, we started out with a very easy first-time user experience. So like the first 5 levels in the game were extremely easy, meant to teach you what was going on. And we did some, we started seeing some churn in the game, and we weren't sure if it was because of the tutorial, people not understanding it, or because the levels were too easy. We did some consumer testing of people that were Match 3 fans and Disney fans, and we started getting feedback from them that the game felt too easy. And that easiness on top of the Disney theme made adult Match 3 players feel like the game wasn't for them. So we went back into it, we changed the TUI, we increased the difficulty significantly, removed a lot of the tutorial layers, expecting that we're just gonna know, people are gonna know what a Match 3 is, and we saw that success churn go away. So sometimes you make an educated decision based on what you think the product is, but the truth and the metrics that you get back, both qualitative from the user testing and quantitative from the KPIs, can tell you that that initial bet was not right and you have to change it. And you really have to be willing to look at the product as always malleable, never probably meeting your expectations in every single part of it. And being willing to look at that data and change that data is one of the keys to successful free-to-play.
Hey, hi Scott. Since I like you.
What's up, man?
Hey, so since I like you so much, I have 2 questions for you. One was in those case examples. How big are those teams, like resource-wise? And then the second follow-up was, as you're doing the optimization of the tuning of the levels, are you actually doing what's the segmentation or cohorting you're doing, if any?
Yeah, so the team size varies. The puzzle game, I think, was roughly around 10 people. Gods of Rome is a much bigger scope project. So we have 16 people working on it. Now the second question, remind me, was about, what was the second question? Yeah, so we do A/B testing, and usually with the puzzle levels, you don't really have to do A/B testing. So, we have experimented with programmatic altering of difficulty based on your ability to progress, and that hasn't really worked as well for us as just creating the levels that are sort of based on our feedback of variability and difficulty. But we do A/B testing all the time. We A/B test everything. We do ABCD test everything. So it's just not typically puzzle progression. It's mostly other things that we look at when we do ABC testing. Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. So the progression that we're looking at when we're looking at ARPU and when we're looking at conversion, we're looking at churn. Those per level monetization metrics are all focused on players, right? Because if you're not in that sort of sweet spot of user spending average revenue per level, then you don't really have a successful product. So I would say that's probably the most important thing, is to make sure that you're balancing your difficulty and your churn against the payers.
So on the puzzle side, again, for Inside Thought Bubble, you actually talked about, hey, you actually introduced this new mechanic, then it will actually drive higher engagement, right? So obviously you cannot actually introduce mechanics every single level, right? And you can actually do it for not introducing anything new for over 2,000 levels, right? So my question is, what is the sweet spot that you guys actually found?
One new mechanic per monthly update. So
okay, so 20 levels.
You're going to be releasing 30 levels or something, let's say, in an update. That mechanic, you can introduce a new mechanic that the user plays with in those new levels, but then that mechanic can start to combine with the other mechanics that you had to create variability in itself. So it's just one mechanic, it's one interesting thing that you're introducing. We learned this on Frozen Freefall as well. So I worked on Frozen Freefall when I was at Disney, and one of the things that we found a lot of value in Frozen Freefall was the new mechanics every month that we would introduce. So I don't know if any of you guys played that game, but if you were playing it and you got the updates, you would this month you would have a feature with Marshmallow, and that the levels would be framed around him, sort of stopping your match 3 gems by blowing snow onto them. But then we would combine that with some of the other mechanics like the wolves or the frozen tiles to create difficulty and variability changes. But that feature was cool. People liked Marshmallow, seeing the character, having the effects, and having that new mechanic, and then being able to layer the other mechanics with that provided a lot of value. So I'd say one a month.
Have you guys actually found actual engagement drop by not introducing things for too long?
We have found, for us, the sweet spot is 4 to 6 weeks. If you go beyond 6 weeks, you're going to definitely start to see your user base fade away, and it depends on the game, of course, but that's where we try to fit in, and sometimes we even push for faster. So on Inside Out, we were doing staggered releases. We're doing 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, just to give people more stuff that they would be able to play.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.